Hi, it's Gwyn, and welcome back to the channel. I hope you're all doing well, and you're willing to join me as we consider one of the most contentious questions in Beatle lore. Was there a fifth Beatle? And if so, who? We're going to look at the top 10 contenders for that title, and a few honourable mentions too. It is, however, noticeable that many of these contenders appear to have the word tragic attributed to their story, as if the term fifth Beatle is some kind of a curse, though from some angles the same could be said for the term Beatle too, but that's a story for another day. Anyway, let's get started. And in no particular order, here we go. Pete Best, the fifth Beatle who was a Beatle. First up, let's look at Pete Best, the original Beatles drummer. Hired in 1960, Pete played with the group during their formative Hamburg years and early Cavern Club gigs. Pete was there just as the Beatles built their reputation in and around Liverpool, just before fame exploded, when suddenly he was dropped in favour of Ringo. This was to be a life-defining event, and one which Pete, to be honest, has struggled with for much of his life, before the balance, particularly in financial terms, was redressed thanks to the anthology project. Despite the mental impact of his sacking, Pete has always been a considerate, modest and human part of their story. Many fans see Pete as the almost Beatle, and while he wasn't on the records that changed the world, his role in shaping the band's early sound gives him a place in this conversation for sure. Billy Preston, the soul of Let It Be. Billy Preston was the only musician to receive co-credit on a Beatles single, Get Back. He brought soulful organ and keyboard work to the Let It Be sessions when the group was struggling to maintain the group ethic. His presence, as was evident in the Get Back film, helped ease the tensions during a pretty turbulent time. And his contributions are immortalised on some of their most iconic late-era tracks. He would maintain his friendships, which originated from the early Hamburg days when he played with Little Richard in 1962. He would go on to be an Apple artist and to join George on his 1974 US tour. George Martin. Sir George Martin, the architect of their recorded sound. George Martin, the Beatles' legendary producer, sometimes called the real fifth Beatle, Martin was more than a studio technician. He was their mentor, arranger and sonic architect. From string quartets to tape loops, Martin helped transform the Beatles' ideas into groundbreaking recordings. There can be no underestimating his contribution. It was absolutely critical. His musical knowledge, mentoring ethic and affable nature was conducive in creating an environment where the Beatles could confidently spread their wings and freely experiment. Surely George is a top contender. Stuart Sutcliffe, the original Beatle bassist. Stuart Sutcliffe, John Lennon's best friend and the band's original bassist. A massively talented painter, Stuart was a moody, artistic presence that helped define the band's early look. Leather jackets, mop-top haircuts. He had the design ethic too. He left the band in 1961 to pursue art and forge a life with girlfriend Astrid Kircher. And tragically died the following year at the age of just 21 of a brain hemorrhage. Lennon often spoke of Stewart with affection, calling him the true artist of the group. His passing was hugely affecting on all of the Beatles, but particularly John. His essence and that of Astrid would continue to influence the Beatles' style in their most formative years. In the Hamburg days of the Beatles as a five-piece unit, he could definitively be considered a fifth Beatle. Brian Epstein, the visionary manager. Brian Epstein, the man who saw something special in four scruffy lads from Liverpool. As their manager, Brian cleaned up their image, secured them a record deal and helped launch Beatlemania. Without Brian's belief, persistence and polish, the Beatles might have remained a club band. Paul McCartney once said, if anyone was the fifth Beatle, it was Brian. Belief is the key word here, as Brian always maintained an unwavering support for his boys. And while in retrospect some of his business decisions look poor, he was forging an untravelled path in the most extreme conditions. Despite exuding humility and class, Brian was a complex and troubled character who died tragically young of a drugs overdose. There can be no doubt that without Brian, there would have been no Beatles, and his place on this list is essential. Neil Aspinall, the loyal road manager. He wasn't a musician, but he was there from the start, the Beatles' roadie, driver and confidant. Over time, Neil became head of Apple Corps and safeguarded their legacy for decades. Throughout all the madness and beyond, Neil was the common thread and a point of contact that was trusted to manage their affairs and to secure their legacy. His behind-the-scenes influence was vital. Neil was the man who helped keep the Beatles universe running smoothly through both chaos and calm. As architect of the Anthology project and steering Apple through legal battles with Alan Klein, EMI and Apple Computers, he was absolutely critical. Neil has often been considered in the mix as a contender, and rightfully so. Derek Taylor, the voice behind the curtain. Derek Taylor, the Beatles' trusted press officer, he crafted their public image, penned witty press releases, and helped shape their global mystique. After the split, he would later work very closely with George on the concert for Bangladesh and played a key role in Apple's communications. Taylor was the band's lyrical ghostwriter in many ways, spinning their legend in real time. But Derek was more than just a PR man. He was a trusted confidant to the Beatles and particularly to George and John. He was also a character that exuded class and was a compelling storyteller. His period at Apple as press officer with his lavish use of his expense account are now legendary. As a fifth Beatle? Maybe. Just maybe. Klaus Voormann, friend, artist and musician. Klaus Voormann, the German artist who befriended the Beatles in Hamburg, he designed the iconic Revolver album cover, which he won a Grammy for. and later played bass with John, George and Ringo in their solo careers. Foreman was definitely part of the inner circle and played on classics like Imagine and All Things Must Pass. Though he never joined the band, he was always around, quietly influencing their world. An accomplished artist and musician in his own right, he also designed the fabulous anthology montage images. And also the booklet that accompanied the 1973 LP, Ringo. A very likeable personality, he maintained good relationships with all of the Beatles as such and should be in the mix. Mal Evans, the gentle giant. Mal was more than just the roadie. Mal was a bodyguard, friend and trusted aide. In recording sessions, he was even known to play instruments or singing backing vocals whenever needed. He was always there, always supportive, on hand to do whatever the boys deemed necessary. He endured many highs and lows during the madness, but he was always a calm and solid presence. Mal was with the Beatles from Liverpool to Abbey Road, a comforting constant as the whirlwind of fame swirled about the Beatles. His journals and memoirs offer a rare and intimate view of his life as within the Beatles' inner circle. But after the Beatles split, he harboured ambitions of music writing, production and management, but was unable to secure anything other than fleeting success. He so deserved better. His life epitomised the now familiar trend of tragic tale, ending horrifically in a hail of police bullets in suburban Los Angeles. Mal, a definite contender for fifth Beatle. Jimmy Nicol, the forgotten Beatle. In 1964, with Ringo hospitalised with tonsillitis, and despite protestations from John, Paul and particularly George, Brian Epstein insisted that the show must go on and there were performances that they had contractually to fulfil. Enter stage left, Jimmy Nicol, an accomplished session drummer who had been spotted by George Martin, and so Jimmy stood in for Ringo for 8 shows during their Scandinavian and Australian tour legs. Jimmy savoured every moment of his brief and bright time in the limelight, and before he knew it, Ringo had returned and the Beatles' juggernaut left town, leaving Jimmy to reflect with a new watch he had been given to him as a thank you by Brian. But Jimmy struggled in managing his musical career from this point forward, and understandably so, never achieving the success he once briefly tasted. For 8 shows, Jimmy Nicol was a Beatle, but was he the 5th Beatle? So who was the 5th Beatle? The truth is, it's not just one person. The Beatles' magic came from a unique synergy, but they were surrounded by extraordinary constellation of collaborators. How's about those honourable mentions there? What about Eric Clapton, who played on While My Guitar Gently Weeps? Drummer Andy White, who played on the LP version of Love Me Do. Mind you, I think he's about as likely a 5th Beatle as me, but there you go. What about Yoko? Whether you love her influence or not, she was deeply intertwined with their story. The person who shouted loudest of being the 5th Beatle was New York DJ Murray the K. Though if you watch the recent Beatles 64 documentary, it looks as though the Beatles endured rather than enjoyed his presence, though I'm sure they were very, very grateful for the exposure he brought to them on that very first tour. But let's not also forget the fans. Aren't the fans the fifth Beatle? They really drove everything. In my view, there isn't one clear candidate. George Martin and Brian Epstein, I couldn't split the two, to be honest. Each of them played an absolute critical part in their success. But what's your view? Did we miss anybody? Drop your pick of the fifth Beatle in the comments below, and don't forget to like and subscribe and hit the bell for more deep dives into the Beatles news, history and reviews. So until next time, bye for now.